It's Thursday, May 9th, 2019. This is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. You know that's me. And with me today is Danny Kelly, formerly of Field Goals, now of the smaller site, The Ringer, and Jacson Bevens, currently of Field Goals, taking his summer vacation that he deserves between cigar thoughts. We're back on the show, guys. Welcome back.
Yeah. What's
Yeah.
up?
Stoked to be here, man.
Seahawks have done some things.
The Seahawks have done some things, and we haven't talked about it at all for the whole year. So, man, there's so much to cover, and let's get right into it. And we're doing this on May 9th, which is the day that the Seattle Seahawks signed Ezekiel Ansah to a one-year contract, formerly of the Detroit Lions, 5th overall pick in 2013, giving, Pete Carroll and John Schneider even more juice from the worst draft of our lives. And following Luke Jokel and all these guys. But overall, we know the deal with Ansah, injuries and talent. Starting with you, Danny, what are your thoughts on the signing? And do you have, belief? I guess, how much can we feel good about this?
Well, to be totally honest, I'm a little bit worried about it. I mean, in theory, it's an awesome signing. I just keep coming back to the Luke Jokel thing too, where it was they signed him to be this big time difference maker, and his knee just sucked the entire year, and he was terrible. Obviously, Ansah is a totally different player, but with the news that his shoulder is still healing and he might not even be able to do training camp, and this is per Adam Schefter, some people believe he won't be able to play for the first month of the season, if not more. That really worries me. Not just because he might not be even available, but if he is available, he could be less than 100%. So love the player, I think it's a risk that they absolutely should have and had to take, because they don't have a pass rush right now per se. But I think I'm a little bit skeptical that it's going to be as good as everyone thinks it can be. But overall, I love Ansah. I think it's a risk they had to take.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about Ansah.
I think too, you gotta factor in that. What's that?
Oh yeah, well yeah, just was saying in terms of, I've been talking about Ansah since last year because it does seem like a good signing in terms of a fit, but
perfect.
Jacson, go on.
Jacson, what were you saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's not overlook that. Seattle is presumably getting him at a discount, so that injury concern is factored into a $5.5 million price tag. I mean, if we're talking about a fully healthy, optimized Ziggy Ansah, there's no chance they're getting him for under $6 million. Try and make right now. I mean,
right.
They've got some promise in their pass rush, but very little production. Rasheem Green, Jacob Martin, those are guys that as Seahawks fans you can get excited about, or at least talk yourself into getting excited about, but they're not needle movers. And this gives you, in the absence of Frank Clark, potentially not only really productive pass rush if he ends up being okay, but also a guy who knows how to do it and who knows how to get to the quarterback at the NFL level and knows all of the tricks and who is remarkably disciplined in his assignments. That's only a good thing when you've got really young depth on a defensive line.
Yeah, and the Seahawks do have one of the more interesting collections of defensive players right now that they've had in the last 5-6 years, just because there are so many new guys, and definitely in the time since, if we talked about the time since Danny, you were still at Field Goals to now, It's a completely different team, and that's just 3 years, and then even if we look back to 1 year, a lot of these guys are leaving, and defensive end is the one that a lot of people talk about as Seattle's weakest position, and maybe even one of the weakest, sort of positional groups among playoff contenders, perennial playoff contenders. But we'll see how well some of these players react. But in terms of the other positions on defense, I think linebacker has an insanely high number of guys who can start, probably, maybe.
Yeah.
There's so much talent at linebacker, it seems like right now, though we'll see the health of KJ Wright and the the current state of Michael Kendricks. But what are your thoughts on the cornerbacks right now, Danny? Because that one also seems like maybe we haven't talked about it as much, and yet there wasn't that much confidence in Shaquille Griffin at the end of last season, and Trey Flowers. We still don't know. One season is just one season.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the cornerback position right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still a pretty big question mark, obviously, with Griffin having kind of a
I'm going to ask Jacson maybe if he could mute his microphone. Yeah. I think that's where the wind might be coming from.
Jacson, are you on a hike?
Yeah, hang on. Let me switch here. There's like no wind where I'm at, but I might be in a little bit of a weird spot. So
anyway. I apologize.
Nope, all good.
That's better. So yeah, I obviously with Griffin kind of having a down second year, I think that raises kind of question marks about like his long-term potential to be a starter at that spot. I think you could worry about Flowers kind of having a sophomore slump as well. Obviously, he played pretty well, all things considered, as a rookie, but I still think both sides are kind of a big question mark. They did re-sign, some veteran guy, like some veteran help in Nico Thorpe, although he's probably more of like a special teams ace at this point. Akeem King, they just signed Jamar Taylor today. So that could be a nice little addition. Hopefully he can play in the slot a little bit, but I still think all three positions are pretty much question marks at this point. You have this baseline of production from Griffin and Flowers, but I don't know if that's necessarily like where they want to be. They probably want to be, quite a bit better at that spot.
Yeah, it seems like at least with Pete Carroll, you're getting some of the best coaching you could possibly ask for at the position, or maybe at any position. Jacson is now. I can't unmute him.
Is he muted right now?
He's muted right now. And now the unmute is gone. So, welcome to Google Hangouts, everybody. For some reason, it's gone defunct years ago, and I'm still using it. So, this is me. This is all me.
How do you unmute him? I can see this. I can see him on this picture here, but
can you guys hear me?
Oh, yeah. There he is.
Maybe you have to. Apologies again, Jacson. Hey, look. Welcome to Amateur Hour with Kenneth Arthur. I'm the amateur. This is the hour. Jacson, what were your overall thoughts? Because Shaquille Griffin did get a lot of criticism last year. Trey Flowers picked up all the praise, and I think Griffin, obviously, after a very good rookie season, and I think again we cannot stress enough that Griffin is a third round pick and Flowers a fifth round pick, and these guys have played less than 2 years, 2 years in the NFL, and they're starting, and it seems good. But as far as losing Justin Coleman and doing all that, Jacson, what were your thoughts on Griffin at the end of last year? Did you think were you maybe a little bit higher on him than other people?
I am. I think that a lot of times if not all the times, our opinions are relative to the expectations. And I think Griffin's exceeded our expectations in year one. And we started to wonder, are we looking at Richard Sherman Light? And he, I don't know that he was so much worse last year than he was the year before. He was, I think, the one of the most targeted corners in the NFL as a rookie. And, he's became the number one guy in that secondary last year. And this, as a corner. And so I think we had really high expectations that he didn't meet, but I don't really feel like he was bad. And Danny said something last year about him that once he said it, I really started to pay attention to, and I think is true. He has some real questions about his ball skills and his ability to find the ball in the air, which is something we were so spoiled with the corners that came before him. But when I watch him cover guys, I think he's pretty sticky, and I think he's got the ball. He gets a lot of contested catches where the coverage is really good, but he loses the hand fight or doesn't jump in time. And I'd like to think, or don't. I don't think he's ever going to be a real high interception guy.
Uh-huh.
But
cutting in and out a little
such
bit,
an
Jackson.
interesting spot to be in, because the modern NFL, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you right now.
Hello? Okay. You know, in the modern NFL, it's about passing production and passing prevention. And Seattle on defense isn't really in a position on paper to be great at either. And so, I mean, honestly, for as much individual talent as they have, and I think it's the best linebacking core in the NFL by a good margin, linebacking has become a less important position group. And I could see this defense giving up a lot of points this year.
Yeah, that's really interesting, you know, and I haven't spent too much time talking about whether or not linebackers, you know, what the value is of linebackers. We talk so much about the value of running backs, and we talk so much, obviously, about the value of quarterbacks and a lot of positions, but maybe not linebackers. And the Seahawks have a bunch that we could, you know, talk about. I still want to go back and talk about some of the things that we haven't covered since we haven't spoken in so long. Before I do that, I forgot I would be remiss to not mention our sponsor this month. His name is Joshua Thompson. And can you guys guess what Joshua Thompson is advertising on Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur?
I do not know.
Got nothing.
Joshua is advertising that he wants someone to come to the Dominican Republic and have a beer with him and talk about the Seahawks.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, all of April.
Oh, wow.
Was
You know what? That was the guess that I had. I should have just said it.
All of April was Josh Thompson month. Thanking him for, you know, sponsoring Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, which is a Patreon podcast, and you can go to patreon.com/fieldgoals. For just $2 a month, you get all of these episodes like this for free. But this one is sponsored, and it's coming out for free so that everyone can listen to it and hear the. I don't want anyone to miss out on Danny and Jacson coming back on the show. So definitely do that. Josh was a humanitarian doing great things down at the Dominican Republic. I went to the Dominican Republic last year, not because of Joshua, just coincidentally, and I absolutely loved it. So I think it's a good message to send, and I just want to say thank you again to Josh for sponsoring the show, being a fan, and I definitely want someone to go down there and have a beer with him.
Go see him. Yeah.
Yeah, and
hang
talk
out
about the Seahawks. And if you don't do it by the end of the year, me, Danny, and Jacson are guaranteeing right now, we are making a pledge that we'll go to the Dominican Republic on Jackson's dime. And it's just, I can't wait to do it.
Happy to do it, fellas.
It's going to be great.
Yep. Happy to do it.
So much to cover, guys. The Russell Wilson contract, 4 years.
Yeah.
What was it? $140 million. We haven't talked about it at all. Seemed like, yeah, foregone conclusion, your franchise player. But, you know, starting with you this time, Jacson, any hesitation whatsoever to the $35 million a year? Or how do you feel about this contract, especially with the benefit of a little bit of hindsight, seeing the moves that they made since with Frank Clark and Ansah and just moving things around?
I think on its own, you know, the deal is fine. You know, I do believe there are a handful of players that are worth 20% of your team salary cap. I think it's a very small handful, but I think Russell Wilson is one of them. You know, would it be great to save a bunch of money at that position? Of course, but it's easy to get locked into just thinking about say what is the reality of this team without Russell Wilson, and it's pretty dark, both from a competitive standpoint as the way the roster is currently constructed, and from just a marketability standpoint. I mean, I can imagine the Seahawks letting their most marketable player in franchise history not get what he needs to stay there and be happy and not be questioning the franchise. But I think that what will determine whether or not it's a good move or a great move is what they do afterwards with that squeeze on their capital. And I think that they are crushing this offseason for what it's worth. I love the Frank Clark trade. You know, I love that they were able to bring back KJ Wright. I really hope they get Bobby wrapped up. You know, and the thing is with Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner on a team, I just can't imagine them losing a bunch of games. Like that's going to keep you competitive and keep a winning mentality with that franchise while you build, you know, this second run around them. And I think they had to do it. I think that the correlating moves have been really good in terms of freeing up cap space, creating a ton of draft picks both this year and next year.
Yeah.
I think they're knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, it's been it seems like I've been writing about John Schneider and starting a new series, just sort of writing about all the things that I think John Schneider does well, and it's hard to separate John Schneider from Pete Carroll, and just you can call them the tandem if you'd like to. But one of the things that is interesting about maybe the Russell Wilson contract, or at least the future of Russell Wilson, is that this will be, some would say, the first time, and it's all speculation, but maybe the first time that Russell Wilson's never had Doug Baldwin, and Doug Baldwin, the rumors that maybe he will not be returning next season because of the injuries. You look at it, and I'm trying to think. I don't know if I'm missing anyone, but at this point, Doug Baldwin, no, KJ Wright. So Doug Baldwin and KJ Wright are the only players left from 2011. And Doug Baldwin, maybe he's going to be the next out. Danny, we've seen Russell Wilson barely ever play without Doug Baldwin, but last year he missed a few games, and then he wasn't really healthy for the rest. And it doesn't seem like it's the same when you don't have Doug. I mean, obviously it's not the same when you don't have Doug, but it seems like just hugely worse sometimes.
I mean, I think Baldwin is the guy on that receiving core that can just get open whenever he wants. And that, I think that was, big for Russell Wilson. His hands were automatic. He could catch like really, really off target, tough catches all the time. Just think back throughout all the years of him just making these ridiculous, like one-handed grabs or like toe touch grabs by the sideline. Clearly losing Baldwin, if that's what ends up happening, it's looking like that's what's going to happen. Could be a big hit on the Seahawks in terms of their efficiency, especially on third downs. I think is going to be kind of the key spot where they're really going to miss him. I guess now that assuming Baldwin's gone, it becomes Lockett's turn to like shine. Clearly, I think they had that in mind when they signed him to that big contract before last season. He lived up to it, and I think he's obviously a very different player than Doug Baldwin, but I think he showed last year that he's a big time playmaker that can kind of pick up some of that slack. And then you're going to have a lot of guys kind of trying to come out and develop and turn into the next big thing or whatever. So I really like David Moore, but he's still a big question mark. I really like DK Metcalf, another huge question mark. And then Gary Jennings, I was just going back and watching him yesterday. He's really fun. I think he has a lot of potential. So there's some guys in this offense that could end up stepping up, kind of like we saw with Lockett last year. But I think overall, obviously, it's a huge, huge loss if Baldwin does retire. Especially, I'm most concerned on like third downs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, and
especially if we're going to have an offense that's designed around getting to third down.
Right. Exactly.
And yeah, it's especially, the Seahawks bringing in all these new receivers who are rookies. Obviously, it's just hard you can't tell what they're going to do. And I'm sure the Seahawks aren't done. They're not going to be done looking at veteran receivers, of course, either. And as soon as Doug Baldwin, if he does go, these guys will become available. But for you, Jacson, I feel like you're a guy who will be devastated when Doug Baldwin retires, that you love this guy. And I think we all love him, but what's Jackson's love letter to Doug Baldwin today?
Yeah, I think that I really, really, really appreciate the role that Doug Baldwin has on that team, both on the field and in the locker room. And, what do we really know about these guys? Not much, but he does seem to have really grown from, I got the sense early in his career, he was that, college freshman coming home for Christmas dinner and spouting his philosophy 101, change the world type of stuff. And I think he's really grown and matured into a true leader in every sense, and really sets the tone for the receiver room. Honestly, I think he sets the tone for that entire offense outside of Russell Wilson. And, it's tough when you have a receiver like Doug Baldwin who doesn't have the size to create margin for error for losing quickness. And if his injuries are causing him to lose quickness, he to adjust his game when separation is his game. Like Danny said, he gets open more frequently than almost any receiver in the NFL, and quicker than almost any receiver in the NFL. If that part of his game goes, it's hard to see him having a big impact. And I am a huge Tyler Lockett guy. One of my very favorite Seahawks. I loved the deal when they re-signed him. I thought he totally outperformed it. But he's not the guy that's going to get open in his first 3 steps, and he's not the guy that's going to be, you're really count on him on 3rd and 8 type of receiver. So it's just going to take a ton of development from Metcalf and Moore and Jennings and whomever else is out there. And at the receiver position, it usually takes, unless you're Julio Jones, it usually takes 2 or 3 years to really learn how to run NFL routes and beat NFL coverage and, disguise your tells that you could get away with in college and all that kind of thing.
I think, speaking about Doug Baldwin in the future and change, it's a good opportunity then to talk about the Seahawks rookies in the draft class that they've taken. We haven't had an opportunity to do that either. Obviously, we talked about the Frank Clark trade. Well, we haven't talked about the Frank Clark trade, but we mentioned it. So there you go. And just talking about the draftees, though, because, in my opinion, I wrote about this past week where, basically, I think they traded Frank Clark for LJ Collier and a 2020 second-round pick. All the other moves that John Schneider made to, increase his draft class, I think really came from that pick 21 and the options. But although the Frank Clark trade gave him a lot more freedom, I think, looking at that draft class that they went from originally 4 picks to the Clark gave him 5 picks, and they went up with 11 picks. LJ Collier is going to be the first pick. And just talking about Collier as compared to, their normal run of late first-round picks, and we're talking about Jermaine Ifedi, we're talking about Malik McDowell at the top of the second, we're talking about what the Seahawks tend to do with their first pick every year. So, Danny, how do you feel about LJ Collier? Does he line up with your normal expectations of Seattle's first pick in a current draft? Do you have higher hopes as the time has gone on? What's going on with your thoughts on Collier?
Collier to me matches up in the sense that he was broadly considered a reach, which is exactly the Seahawks' MO at this point in the first round. I like him, though, as a player. Like, he was a guy that really stood out at the Senior Bowl. He rushes with a ton of power. He's just like an ass kicker. He's definitely not in the same sort of like prototype or whatever for what they like, in the sense that he's not a very good athlete, like based on his measurables. And so that's a little bit, I guess, concerning, but overall, I really like him. Like, his tape is fun to watch. He just bullies tackles and just like, I think he can line up at multiple spots on the line. I think he'll be a valuable player for them, an early contributor for them. I don't know if he'll ever be like a superstar or anything like that, but I think it could have been worse. I'll put it that way. I like Collier. I think he's definitely probably a reach a little bit, but I really like him. I think he'll be a good contributor for them and could be like a 6 or 7 sack guy in the same sort of way that Michael Bennett was always kind of like. I know that they're not the same player, but Bennett was never like a huge double-digit sack guy. He was just like tons of pressures and lots of disruption and things like that. I think Collier could kind of play that same type of, could be in that same type of role.
And Jacson, for you can talk about Collier as well. But and by the way, got you on that mute again, so I think you got to hit that unmute button. But in terms of the whole draft class and what you wanted the Seahawks to come away with in the draft class, did you get what you wanted with the Seahawks? Would they come away with? And who's your Jacson pick in this class?
Yeah, I love what they did. I hated only having 4 picks with every need that they needed to address. The fact that they were able to get 11. And that a lot of them were, in the first half of the draft was really impressive to me. I got on the DK bandwagon leading up to the draft. I was a little concerned about some of those agility numbers and lack of production in college and all of that stuff. Those concerns were on my radar, but DK is definitely my guy. The more I watched him, look, it's easy to, get over enthusiastic about a guy who hasn't played an NFL down, but I mean, there's Calvin Johnson potential with this guy. And, you know, is he going to be that? Who knows? But does he have the game for it? Yeah, maybe. And as I started to watch more and more of him, what I'm seeing is a guy who just obliterates a 10-yard cushion. You know, you're so scared of the top, and he's right past you anyway. And once he's even, it's just over. And, you know, he seems to struggle with a couple of routes, comebacks, kind of hook routes and in routes. You know, they're just sort of soft routes that he runs. But honestly, how often do we see the Seahawks run either of those? They don't run in routes. They don't run a lot of stops. And Pete Carroll's a big-time field stretcher. And I personally think Russell Metcalf, once he learns how to run NFL routes and anticipate NFL coverages, I mean, they could be one of the best deep ball combos in the NFL.
I can't wait to see him. I can't wait to see him play with a good quarterback too, because man, watching Ole Miss's offense last year was so frustrating. It was just insane. I talked to a couple of people who were like, you know, take a flyer on Jordan Ta'amu or whatever, however you pronounce his last name in the late rounds. I'm like, man, did you watch that tape? He had like 3 top 100 players in his receiving core, and it was just awful all the time, including I think his second round.
That reminds me of Mettenberger, right? Like, wasn't Mettenberger a second round pick because of his numbers? Then you're like, oh, he was throwing to Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. and
right,
all of these like top tier NFL talent. You know, sure, he wins all these games and they scored a bunch of points, but you know, it was clear that he was made by the talent around him.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Russell Wilson throw him, with anticipation to him, because I think he'll be able to stretch a defense in a way like where defenses have to start thinking about him, like putting someone over the top of him, because, versus a lot of cornerbacks, he's going to have size and speed down the sideline. If you make one false step, it's like over with him. So
what exactly, this is the thing that, I mean, sometimes I think it's interesting. We talk about players falling in the draft or whatever, going later than you would have expected based on their talent. And I think one possible thing that happens is, we always say like, oh, well, all these teams didn't like this guy. But I think sometimes it's possible that you could literally go 25 or 30 picks and every team is looking at DK Metcalf or at least let's say 8 teams are looking at DK Metcalf and he just happens to be number 2. He just happens to be their number 2 choice. And it's just like, we like him, but we really need a defensive tackle and so-and-so's here. And hopefully Metcalf is available later. And maybe just enough teams did that for the Seahawks to, be in the position to move up and grab him and get what they need to do, to get him later on. But Danny, I mean, is there anything for Metcalf where you're like, on the other hand, he did go this late because, and maybe, nothing happens.
I mean, obviously, I think the separation thing on the underneath it was a concern. He was also injured several times in college. And there's kind of this thought that maybe the NFL just doesn't care as much about size anymore as it used to. I mean, if you look at some of the guys that went in front of him, like Marquise Brown, really, really small. Deebo Samuel, different type of guy. Nicole Hardman. I'm looking at the NFL.com right now, the draft tracker. They have all these guys as like official first names right now. So I'm looking at the list. It's Tyson Samuel, Arthur Brown, Corey Hardman, the Kalen Metcalf. It's like, who are these people? I was like, who is Tyson Samuel? Anyway, but yeah.
Chukwa.
But yeah, so like I think there are legitimate like concerns with this guy, and that's why he fell to where he fell. I think also just in general, receivers fell in this class. There was 2 first rounders. If you think back a couple years ago, there was 3 top 10 receivers, and receivers have kind of struggled out of the gate over the last few years in general. So maybe the NFL just was looking at this class and really valued other guys. Other positions or whatever. So I do think that there are legitimate concerns with Metcalf, but he was my second rated receiver in this class. I still have faith that he's going to be really good. I think he found a very good situation in the sense that he's a prototype deep threat. and having Russell Wilson as his quarterback, I think is perfect.
It seems like, and this is because this could just be me, but it definitely seems like wide receiver is a position where a lot of times when you're looking at, it's just a lot of times the second round guys are better than the first round guys, or the third round guys are better than, it seems like it's one where the teams, it maybe is so dependent on quarterback, it's so dependent on the time to throw, so dependent on coaching, so dependent on so many things maybe, or maybe it's just a difficult position to evaluate, but it definitely seems like a lot of the times you could go back in the last few years, there haven't been very many good receivers coming out in the first couple of rounds. And then you get the guys like a couple of years ago and you get Michael Thomas going in the second round after a first round with 3 or 4 or 5 wide receivers went in it. But Jacson, if I'm looking at this, and Jacson and Danny, but we'll start with you, Jacson. I'm looking at this, and Cody Barton, linebacker, Gary Jennings, receiver, Phil Haynes, guard, Ugo Amadi, safety / cornerback, Ben Burr-Kirven, linebacker, Travis Homer, running back, DeMarcus Christmas, defensive tackle, John Ursua, wide receiver. Probably don't expect the answer to be the last few of these guys, but give me a name in that list to pass the second round of a guy who is most likely to start next season.
Ooh. I'm with Danny on Jennings. I think he's super intriguing, but I'd say the main reason I would choose him is I think there's the most opportunity there for, in that receiver room. You really, if we're assuming Baldwin is out or not his best self, there's one starting receiver for sure on that team. And on tape, and I know you existed in a really wide open offense, and that can make things difficult to evaluate. I mean, I thought Tavon Austin was a can't miss, going to tear the league up type of receiver because no one could get close to him in college, right?
So did the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so it's sometimes those offenses make it really tough. You see a lot of Big 12 receivers. Baylor's put a bunch of receivers in the NFL who just had bonkers numbers, and it didn't translate. So is reliable with Russell Wilson. I don't see any reason why he couldn't be the third receiver on that team.
Danny, I want to switch topics and just quickly move over to Frank Clark. The Seahawks opting not to extend him, and he gets $50 million guaranteed or whatever, and the big deal. As far as the Seahawks and Frank Clark, do you believe that in general, the amount of money the Chiefs gave to Frank Clark in general makes sense for some teams, or that it's something that all teams should avoid, or maybe something that teams should do? Maybe you feel the opposite of that. And how good do you think Frank Clark really is? I mean, how good do you think he really is?
I think so. My kind of final impression, I was telling Jacson this actually, that I think Frank Clark is a very good pass rusher who got paid elite money, which happens with a lot of these premium positions. Teams will overpay guys because they have a strong need or whatever. I think for the Chiefs, how they got to it based on like trading D Ford and deciding not to do this, that, the other, like how they ended up getting Clark. Obviously, they gave up a first round pick for him also, and that factors in. But when you have a quarterback who is on his rookie contract, you can have the flexibility to give guys top of market money at other positions. I think the Seahawks were in a position where they were saying, we're paying Russell Wilson literally top of market quarterback money, which is the top of the market. And then we're going to have to pay Bobby Wagner top of market money. Are we going to want 3 guys getting paid the most amount of money at each of their positions on one team? And I think the answer for them was obviously no, because they traded him. And I think what they did with the trade and just in general this offseason, which was turn 4 picks into 11 picks, is exactly what you have to do when you're paying your quarterback $30 million a year. You need to add a bunch of players to improve your depth throughout the rest of your roster. You can't necessarily trust yourself to make 1 or 2 or 3 picks and have all 3 or 4 of them, turn out to be very, very good. So I think just in general, what they've done this offseason makes a ton of sense based on how they're kind of structuring their roster around Russell Wilson, and eventually it will be around Bobby Wagner on defense. And I think those two players are going to get top of market money. They didn't want to give that top of market money to Earl Thomas. They didn't want to give that top of market money to Frank Clark. And so, that's kind of just how it went. I think that they looked at it and said, I think Frank Clark is a good player, but he's not a top of market money like type player necessarily. Mm-hmm. So I think he's very good, but I wouldn't say he's the best pass rusher in the NFL.
Yeah. Do you guys know who the highest paid player on the Kansas City Chiefs in terms of cap number is for next season?
Apart from Clark?
Well, here's the funny thing.
Is Clark not even it?
Frank Clark's cap hit next season, according to overthecap.com, is $6.5 million. And then after next season, beginning in 2020, he's basically getting paid like a mid-tier quarterback, making $22 million, $24 million, $24 million, $26 million, which is mid-tier now. But he's well over $20 million in the following 4 seasons. So he's not even close to the top. Jacson, any guess the highest paid player in the Chiefs next year?
Man, is it?
They've got a lot of talented players.
I think I know who it is.
Is he still there?
Eric Berry? No, he got cut.
Houston? Who is it?
I was going to say Sammy Watkins.
Okay. Sammy Watkins cap hit next season, $19 million.
Oh my goodness!
According to overthecap.com.
Yeah. How much is Honey Badger making? Because he's probably up there too.
According to Over the Cap, they've really reduced the amount of money that they're paying to these new signees. There's only $6 million to Matthew.
Okay.
And then Matthew, I think.
Tyrann Matthew. I don't know.
But then he goes up to 16 next season.
Yeah.
But the Chiefs, they have a very weird team. Who knows what's going to happen with Tyreek Hill? And yikes. Going into the Seattle Seahawks.
I want to talk about the offensive line for
I was
a
just
second.
going to say, we haven't said anything about the offensive line. We don't have to talk about the offensive line as much as we used to. Maybe it just doesn't come up as much because there's so many other things to talk about. And it's interesting that we don't talk about it as much as we used to. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
I think I am excited about the makeover of this offensive line. And it's gone from undersized, super athletic dudes who ended up sucking a lot, during the Tom Cable era. And it's turned into like these 350-pound ass kickers at every position. I love it. So like Dwayne Brown is awesome. He's just like this huge road grader at left tackle. They signed Micah Iupati, who in theory, if he could stay healthy, is... he just conjures up memories of those old school 49ers teams back in the Seahawks 49er era when they were just like running power down everyone's throat. So I love Iupati in theory. If he can't play, this Phil Haynes guy, the rookie, is really exciting. Like he's the same kind of deal, just pancakes guys in front of him. He's like 340 pounds or whatever.
He looks mean.
Dude, put him next to Dwayne Brown and you've got like the two biggest barrel-chested offensive linemen in the NFL maybe. So like I just think it's really cool how they've kind of shifted from this undersized wide zone offensive line philosophy to we're running power and we're having guys that are all like 330 plus pounds on our offensive line. So I think that's really fun. Just first of all, I think obviously they were much better last year than they had been in years past. And Kenny, like you said, it's not, it's not like we don't have to think about the offensive line necessarily as like this huge negative anymore. So that's just kind of refreshing.
And Jacson, you talked about how nasty Phil Haynes looks and how nice that could be. There was so much focus on Tom Cable for 6 years, and then Mike Solari comes in. What are your overall thoughts on the first season of Mike Solari? Do you think that? I mean, I think it's so impossible for anyone to say that that an assistant coach is better than a different assistant coach. There's just so many factors. I don't know, but. Do you think that Mike Solari, in your time in viewing him here, is a better coach, or do you think like he could just be a better fit for this team?
Well, I mean, I personally think Mike Solari is a good offensive line coach. I think that Tom Cable was unequivocally bad. And I think that he, there have been rule changes and style changes from the time when he really came up as considered one of the great minds in offensive line coaching. But, I think that he consistently put guys in positions to fail. The athleticism gap between defensive linemen and offensive linemen grows every year. And I mean, if you're a hyper athletic 300 pounder, what side of the ball, in your NFL quality, what side of the ball are you going to choose? You're going to go make more money and fame and everything on the defensive line. They're just better athletes. And to ask guys, especially positional converts, to block the size of a boxing ring against a Von Miller or a JJ Watt or an Aaron Donald or whomever is just setting them up to fail. What I love about Solari is he wants his guys to engage the person they're blocking right away. Don't give them room to pick up speed or set up a move. Just get into their chest early and be strong and be solid. And I think that creates a little bit more predictability for Russell Wilson, which translates to more predictability on the timing of passes with receivers. There's been so many times in Wilson's career where receivers will run their routes and they're basically got trained to the point where it's like, okay, you come out of your break and then find Russell Wilson and go to him. And last year, I think we saw a lot more timing routes. It's clear that for better or worse, the team, at least last year, wanted to really commit to the run more so than any other team in the NFL, besides the Ravens once Lamar Jackson took over. Presumably, they're going to want to do that again. This style of blocking is far more conducive to that approach. So I just think it's a more realistic fit and a more realistic approach with Solari for the modern NFL than Tom Cable. And we saw it. Cable went to the Raiders where they got 3 first-round offensive linemen down there, and they're terrible. They were just all awful.
Yeah, they dismantled what was one of the best offensive lines in the NFL really quickly. So that's great.
Yeah, I mean, same sort of. I got a couple more questions, and we're gonna wrap this up. But same to you, Danny. Just thoughts on that Mike Solari first season, and you talked about how much you like the way that the offense line is being rebuilt. What's the ceiling, do you think, this season?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question. The ceiling, obviously, I think would be like above average, but what's nice is the floor is a lot higher, or at least it feels a lot higher to me. So, I mean, give Russell Wilson a few, like a beat or 2 extra, and that's a huge, huge, huge difference for what he can do versus what he was doing kind of like in the last couple of seasons. So, I agree with Jacson on everything in terms of like, let's turn some like 7th round defensive lineman into a guy that's going to block the best athletes in the world. That seems like a bad idea. And in retrospect, it does anyway, because I think a lot of us were kind of excited about it at the time, but like, in retrospect, it's like, man, that was just never going to freaking work. So I personally really like the multiplicity of what the Seahawks do on offensive line now in terms of their run
I got to
blocking.
go watch a Michael Keaton movie. Hold on a second.
Underrated movie, by the way.
Absolutely.
I like pizza, Steve. So, yeah. What was I saying? Oh, basically, I like that. I like that they kind of mix things up on the offensive line in terms of what they're blocking. It's not the same damn thing every freaking snap. They were always trying to do stuff with guys that weren't able, like they're asking guys to execute blocks that they just couldn't do. So I really like the fact that they're mixing it up with more power. They're doing traps and things like this that keep defensive linemen off balance and kind of like lunging and things like that. Before, it was just like Aaron Donald could just sprint through the offensive line whenever he wanted. Now you're trapping him or pulling a guard around him or whatever, and it's just so much easier to I think use the guys that you have to make the block, and these guys can make those blocks, in other words. And so it was just really, really frustrating for like years trying to watch guys make reach blocks on these wide zone plays that they just were never, ever going to be able to make. So, I like it a lot.
I'm gonna do this one. This next question is sort of a speed round of sorts, but consider it. You can give just a one-word answer, and then if you have some thought, like a little follow-up, you can do that sometimes, but don't feel you have to do it every time.
Okay.
This is so it's getting close to the middle of May. We're roughly 4 months out from week 1. I'm going to give you guys the name of a player, and you're going to tell me if he's going to be on the roster and active in week 1. Okay. So this is a little bit of a Final 53 game, but at the end of the day, just a little thought or, what your gut says. We'll start with the easy one. Not easy, but we'll start with the one on the biggest question on people's mind, maybe. So Jacson, that means you're not muted. I'm not muting you. This is open air. But we'll go Danny Jacson. We'll keep it Danny Jacson.
Okay.
Doug Baldwin, week 1.
Retired.
David Moore.
He'll be a starter.
Wow.
Starter.
I got to talk about it a little bit, just in terms of does that concern you?
A little bit, but I'm one of the main David Moore hype accounts, I'd say, on Twitter. And so he's inconsistent, young, definitely faded last year, but I still have a lot of faith that he can be a good player in the NFL. So I'm excited to see what will happen with him.
Yeah, I think David Moore is a contributor for sure. If we're talking week 1, though, that's just asking for a ton of development. If we're assuming Doug Baldwin's gone, you're just asking for a ton of development from these rookies to kick David Moore out of a starting spot.
Yeah. And who knows what the Seahawks kicking situation is going to be. So I don't know if they'll be able to kick any receivers. CJ Procise.
Cut. Well, yeah, probably cut.
I just don't think there's any. I agree.
Or traded.
I just don't think there's any reason to cut him. I mean, Mike Davis is gone. If he's your 4th running back, he can do a lot worse, I still think.
Well, it depends. Let me
cut.
preface it by saying it depends on if they want to keep a fucking fullback again.
Right.
If they don't want to keep a fullback, he'll be on the roster. But if they do keep a fullback, there's a chance he could get cut.
No fullbacks on the roster now, right?
I don't know. What's the deal with Trey Madden? Is he still on the team?
He's not there. So I think they don't have any fullbacks now, but we'll see.
But the thing is, there's 3 or 4 times a year where Pete just gets totally horny for a fullback.
And how many times a year do you get horny?
And so he'll cut someone that I think is a better, producer because he wants a fullback matchup for that game. And yeah. I agree with Danny that CJ's on that block if he decides to go fullback.
Jacob Hollister.
Rostered because Disley will be on the PUP.
Okay.
Not a starter.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be on 53.
No. Okay, great. A little bit of a disagreement. I thought it's a slight one.
I'll fight you, Jacson.
I don't want to pit you guys against each other. Mike Ayupati.
He'll be on the roster. But ask me again in week 4, and he might
be ready for week 1.
No, I mean, if he's going to be in the starting lineup, I think he'll be the starter to start the season.
A little concerned just in terms of his health and everything in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm assuming he's starting week 1, but I'm sure they would love to see someone else take that job from him by the end of the year.
Paxton Lynch.
Cut.
God, he just seems so bad, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They don't have anyone else besides Taryn Christian right now.
They'll pick up some rando that gets cut later.
Yeah, they signed Austin Davis late, right?
I think so, yeah. A couple of years ago. They'll pick up someone who gets cut at the last second, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that they don't. I mean, I hope that Paxton Lynch gives them a reason not to.
And I'm Alex.
Let's go with 6th round pick DeMarcus Christmas.
I just love his last name.
I'll
That's a
give you
good
the
question.
name. Jaron Reed, Nazir Jones, Puna Ford are the top 3 for sure. And then you've got Christmas, Jamie Meter, Brian Moan, undrafted free agent, JD Teal, undrafted free agent.
I'm going to say that Christmas is one of the most likely rookie cuts. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm assuming that he'll be there for depth.
Yeah.
Are they still doing the thing where you're only allowed to suit up 46 or 53 for some reason?
For now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a dumb rule. I could see him being one of the 7 that doesn't suit, but is on the roster.
Mark Mingo.
Oh man. I could see him getting cut.
Yeah,
they have a lot of linebackers now.
Yeah,
They
they got a
do.
lot. I will read them out. Bobby, KJ, and Michael, and then depending where you put Jacob Martin, and then now Cody Barton, Ben Burke-Curvin, Shaquem Griffin, Austin Calitro, Emmanuel Ellerbe. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Man, I mean, if Kendricks isn't available for week 1, then maybe, but I don't see him being on the roster throughout the season.
So he's got and then just for listeners, Bark has a 5.2 cap hit, 4.1 savings if you release him. So,
He's out of here.
Similar situation, Jaron Brown.
I like Jalen Brown. I think he's on the team.
I
do. I think our starters at receiver the beginning of the year are Lockett, Moore, Brown, and then hopefully Metcalf getting snaps.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Brown, Metcalf, Jennings.
I just think, it depends on how many receivers they end up keeping, but I think they want to keep all 3 of their rookies, and it sounds like they're pretty high on this Malik Turner guy. So, but then, like Jacson said, you need some veteran experience. You need people that have taken NFL snaps.
You can't have Russell Wilson counting on a bunch of guys that are learning NFL routes.
It's probably true. So yeah, I'd probably say he's on the roster.
Yeah, and you got to admit, I mean, I think the Seahawks, they do a better job. I don't know. I mean, it feels like they do a better job with undrafted free agents, bringing him in. And at the receiver position, they've had Baldwin, they've had Jermaine Kearse, and they've had David Moore at the 7th round. They seem to have done a good job in just looking at the receivers, and then they've done a worse job maybe in the draft with Amar Darboh and the 4th round and all that kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops. Chris for sure.
Chris Harper.
Yeah.
Kevin Norwood.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't actually looked at his per target numbers, but the sense that I have is that Brown didn't get a lot of targets, but I feel like he did a lot with the targets that he got.
Yeah, I think
he had 5 touchdowns on 17 catches or something. So we'll do a few more here. Wrap this up. Ask one more question. I think these are obviously names. The loss of Earl Thomas, I'm sure it just hurts everybody to think about that. But Tedrick Thompson.
I mean, I think he's still going to be their starter.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where it's gotten with the defense, I think, is overall the defense, it's there's a pretty broad range of outcomes that could happen, but it's hard to get super excited about it at this point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just going to be the same way that it was in 2010, 2011, or going into 2012, where you're looking at it and it's just a matter of whether or not some of these guys become the next version of those old guys.
You need to jump. You need guys to make big jumps this year.
Yeah,
I think.
There's no way for us to sit here and say that the defense will be anything necessarily, because I personally won't sit here and say that Trey Flowers cannot become the next Richard Sherman. I mean, it's a huge bar, but I'm saying a number 1 cornerback. Yeah, I can't say that he won't be that, because last season he'd never played cornerback before, and then he just comes in and he does pretty damn good against NFL players. I'm thinking to myself,
it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's
amazing. You know who we haven't talked about?
Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say it's amazing we've gotten this far talking about these positions in the draft without mentioning Blair. who seems hella exciting.
I mean, yeah, it's going to be nice to see him get on the field because it seems like, he's going to be one of the, the Seahawks drafted a couple guys that are like fan favorite type players, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I can't wait for the
I mean,
camp
they like Blair enough to they liked him enough to risk DK Metcalf going. I mean, they took Blair ahead of Metcalf, and Metcalf's the one we're all losing our minds about, and I think for good reason. But they must have really liked this guy.
Absolutely. I mean, I think
so. I'm just looking at the secondary, and would you say right now that Bradley McDougald is the best player in their secondary? Like,
yes,
and that's the position that Marquise Blair plays. So I'm just curious, like, how that's going to play out.
I mean,
can Blair, Danny, you know this better than I do. Can Blair play nickel? Because we got a big old hole there with Coleman gone. That one's going to hurt a lot.
I think he's more of like a strong safety and a box safety, but he's got the body type to play that position. He's 6'1", 195, hits like bricks, but I don't know if that's necessarily what they see him doing. So, I just think this is going to be very fascinating to kind of watch how this plays out, because maybe they have Bradley McDougald play center field a little bit more.
Is that Blair in? Is that bye Delano?
I don't know what Delano's role is going forward. They keep talking him up a little bit, but I mean, Blair and Delano, I think, play kind of the same role.
Yeah.
I don't think Delano is a free safety necessarily. And it sounds like they're going to have Tedrick play center field with Ugo Amadi and kind of like see who wins that battle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. I don't know how this is going to all play out.
We'll wrap up that segment. I'm curious, just because we never talked about Chris Carson and Rashad Penny. How do you feel about that situation now? Do you think can you pull away from Chris Carson and give it more of an even split? Was that a bad decision to stop giving your star first running back carries? Is it a good decision in the modern NFL to not have any running back top 200 carries? Danny, what do you think that looks like?
I mean, I wouldn't mind if they gave Penny more carries, but I still think Carson is the best running back on the roster. Penny had some definitely exciting runs, though, and I think if he gets healthy and sort of has a full training camp and everything like that, and he can hit the ground running when we start the season, then I wouldn't mind if they kind of mix it up a little bit more. But to me, Carson is still underrated. I think he's just a really good player.
Jacson, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love how Seattle has. Yeah, I love how Seattle has approached their running back position group, which is young, cheap, and diverse. I think I could probably only list 2 running backs that I would feel comfortable giving heavy workloads to all season long. At Ezekiel don't touches, not 25. And I know Carson had some games like that. He's also young without mileage, and he's a beast. He is awesome. But I truly believe that the vast majority of running back production comes from scheme and execution from other players, and less so from outrageous talent from the actual running back. And I would love to see Penny earn some more carries. I just having the idea of having 3, maybe this Homer guy can break in, and take some of the carries that Mike Davis has left behind. But I mean, I'd like to see multiple guys always fresh. I mean, when Pete Carroll was at USC, there was one point where he had 10 running backs on the roster that were first team All-State in high school. I mean, he just loves to bring in fresh talent on each series, and I think that's a great way to approach it.
Well, I mean, with their philosophy, it makes sense, because you want to just I think they look at the run game as wearing people down, and I know that Pete Carroll said this in the past, we want you to feel like you played a hard game when you're done playing us. And so, yeah, I mean, just slamming Chris Carson and Penny into the defenders, 30, 40 times a game, I think that's what Carroll wants. Obviously we've debated the value in that, but yeah, having 2 guys that can do that is
I mean, if you're going to do it,
makes sense.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
Final question, guys, when we wrap this up. Thank you guys again for joining the show. Then it's great to have you back. The Seahawks are, not done finalizing the roster. We just talked about the questions of who could be here and who wouldn't, and there probably will be some free agent signings or trades or veteran pickups and everything. And, the Rams will move things around and the 49ers will move things around a little bit. But as of today, we've seen the schedule. I need to get a little bit of a win-loss prediction. Where does the team stand right now? 10-6 a year ago, made the playoffs. Danny, Jacson, do you see these Seahawks as a playoff team once again?
I'm going to guess. I think they can do 10 wins again. And I think I don't know for sure if that'll be the playoff. I think they'll be a wild card team if they're going to go to the playoffs, but I think they can get to 10 wins again.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, they're not going to finish with a better record than the Rams this year. There's just no way. So, their wild card's the best hope for this team. I have them as a 9-win team, give or take, based on how well they kick. Honestly,
Yeah.
It's just crazy. Seattle's whole game plan is keep the game close and out execute you at the end, and that just means you're going to have games that come down to your kicker. And if Myers can make his kicks, then his team could win 10 games. If he doesn't, it could be 7 or 8. But again, I think realistically, I think 8 wins represents the floor of a Russell Wilson quarterback team.
Yeah, I think that's fair and fun and fine. And that's the end of the episode. Danny Kelly, aka DK Metcalf. What would you like to say? This is your last chance to, if you want to tell people where to find you or plug anything.
You can find me at theringer.com and at Danny B. Kelly on Twitter.
Jacson B. Bevens, what are your thoughts? Plug it.
Yeah. So definitely find me on Twitter at Jacson Bevens. That's Jacson. Remember that no K is okay. And about 16 to 20 times a year, you can find me at Field Goals right after the game with the Cigar Thoughts article.
And let me just add in that I have a nephew named Jackson, and I just want to let people know that K is also okay. If you have a K or not, I just want to give us a shout out to my nephew Jackson and my niece Delaney. So, do you guys want to shout out any kids? No? Okay.
No, we're all right.
Thank you so much, Danny and Jacson, for coming back on the show, having a Seaside chat with me today. Apologies to you guys and to the listeners for any technical difficulties. Those are all on me. That's my responsibility, and I apologize for that. But thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this, this free sponsored episode of Seaside Chats. Thank you to Josh Thompson. As we wrap up Josh Thompson month, please, if you have any questions about how to reach him or how to, get to the Dominican Republic, or maybe you just want to send him an email and start a news friend letter, whatever those are called.
Pen pal.
Pen pal. Thank you. I call him a friend letter, actually. If you want to do that, just hit me up. Hit me up on Twitter at Field Goals, or email me at fieldgoals@gmail.com, or just you can do that anytime you want to. Sign up for the Seaside Joe Daily Seahawks newsletter. You can find the link on Field Goals if you'd like. You know who I am, so you know how to find me. If you're listening to this, it would be weird if you're listening to this and you didn't know who I am, though I guess, Danny, hopefully maybe your ringer guys are coming over here a little bit. I would definitely not hate it. So patreon.com/field goals for if you'd like to throw in a buck. It's whatever. So thank you guys for listening. And oh God, I feel like I'm forgetting something, but that's okay. There's always tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody.